This is a really difficult time for a lot of us. There are people in this room who have lost family members, both in Israel on October 7th and throughout Gaza and perhaps the West Bank in the months since then. There are people who have no directly or indirectly hostages still being held in Gaza. And of course there's imminent fear of another military incursion in Rafah. So there's a lot of tension here, and I just want everyone to respect the fact that there's a lot of mourning happening from two different communities that actually have a lot in common, but are also at war. I'd like to start actually with a moment of silence for all lives that have been lost. I mean, we could go back to 48, but let's just do October 7th. The Jewish lives that were lost on October 7th, the hostages taken on October 7th, the tens of thousands of innocent civilians who have died in Gaza, the hostilities happening in the West Bank. If we could just do a moment of silence to honor not just those who've lost, but all the people in the diaspora here who are in an incredible state of mourning, sadness, and fear. I want to thank the New Israel Fund of Canada for supporting this. They're a really cool group. They've got a table outside. Mohammed Hashim and the Canadian Race Relations Foundations for supporting this. And groups like Standing Together that have been showing what's possible when Jews and Palestinians come together, march together, gather together, talk together. They're doing this on the ground in Israel. And it's just amazing. The color they choose is purple. I have a purple hat here. This isn't an official Standing Together event, but I find myself very aligned with what they're doing. I have so much empathy and sorrow and support for members of my family and friends who have been going to the Israel rallies, waving Israeli flags because they've lost loved ones and they're scared of what's happening with the hostages. And I have cousins in the Israeli army. And despite my critical analysis of what the Israeli army is doing, I'm terrified that those kids, and these are kids, are being sent off to a very dangerous situation. But I've also marched proudly on University Avenue in November with tens of thousands of allies of the Palestinian community, holding up a sign that said, "I'm Jewish, I'm here to support you, we're cousins." And that was one of the most Jewish things I've ever done in my life, and it felt very spiritual, very Jewish. In Toronto, we've seen two groups gathering with two distinct flags, two distinct narratives. Both feel under attack, both feel they're the victims, both rooted in intergenerational trauma, and both of those narratives are built upon foundations of truth. At times it seems that these stories are incompatible with the story of the other. And in some ways they are, but it's one land with millions of people who aren't going anywhere. And the only way forward is if everyone is safe. Either everyone's safe or no one's safe. Either everyone lives in peace with human rights or no one will. And that's why we're here today. And I believe this is probably the largest interfaith gathering since October 7th in Toronto, if not Canada, to talk about this issue. So again, round of applause for you. It's easy and comforting to gather with your own tribe and wave your flag. And there's a time and a place for that. But this is what's really challenging, and I'm really grateful for all of you for being here. Today you will hear things you don't agree with. And that's okay. That's why we're here. The book doesn't provide answers. That's not the goal. The book doesn't tell us whether we should have a one-state solution or a 17-state solution. But it reminds us that the only path forward is through dialogue like this and overcoming the polarization. The book reminds us that we're all human with the same needs and the same dreams. And as cousins, we have much in common. One of the things that our people have in common, I was also going to say, Hine matov u'manayim shevet achim gam yachad, which in Hebrew means how sweet it is for brothers and sisters to gather together and to sit. One of the most powerful things that these two cultures have in common is a deep history and love of the written word, literature, poetry, and music. And with that, I would like to invite Roula Said to step to the microphone and share some words and dreams. Thank you, Roula.
October 7th is my birthday. Trauma has been baked into my life in so many ways, and its transformation has taught me and brought me step by step to the beloved within, my path in life where I choose to build my home. I was born in Kuwait in 1964 to Palestinian parents from the West Bank. My father from Taiba, a Christian village near Ramallah. My mother from Beit Jala, adjacent to Bethlehem, if you're unfamiliar. My father died when I was 40 days old in a bus crash on the road between Taiba and Jericho. He was killed on his way to get life insurance. My mother was 28 years old. Her hair turned white overnight. I will not go into the details of how trauma propagated itself so thoroughly in me over the years to come. But suffice it to say that I received a windfall of maternal love and not so much in the way of protection. My mother and I stayed in Taiba for some 3 years. A harsh mother-in-law and a corrupt church court magistrate made life unbearable for my sweet mom. She decided to join her family in Jordan. The '67 war brought more distress, along with challenges in my health. My mother chose, at my doctor's behest, to move to Canada, someplace fresh. I grew up in multicultural Toronto, East York, Newmarket, Scarborough. I never met a Jew, though, only the soldiers when we went back home. And my high school friend Debbie's new stepmom, who refused to let me in the house when she learned I was Palestinian. It was not till university that I trepidatiously made some Jewish friends. Mostly, our conversations steered clear of Palestine and Israel, and no way would I attend anything publicly, culturally, spiritually Jewish, open to the world as I otherwise imagined I was. Then, in 1999, I met David Bookbinder, and the wall in me began to crumble. Where fear and righteous rage had held on tight, love moved in. The weighty complexity of love. David was the founding artistic director of the Ashkenaz Festival, klezmer trumpeter, leader of the Flying Bulgars. I used to call him the King of the Jews, and wondered how a proud daughter of Palestine and devotee of Arab art and culture such as me could have possibly found my way here. David's world awakened in me an awareness and appreciation of Yiddishkeit. I was drawn into a deep experience of Jewish culture that for me felt different from Israel. And for the first time ever, I met Jews who actually stood up for Palestinian rights and dignity, actively, devotedly. This meant the world to me. The fates of our peoples are tied together irrevocably, and more personally, David and I have a daughter. My days of othering are long over. Thank you for receiving some of my story. I'd like to leave you with 3 dreams, 3 wishes, and a song, not in that order. Dream number 1. In the 7 years before I met David, I had a live-work studio on Spadina in college where I taught and practiced Arabic dance and music. The building was owned by Mrs. Britstone, who had a number from a concentration camp tattooed on her arm. Word was, among the tenants, that her teenage child had committed suicide in the apartment below me long before I moved in. One day, as I was doing my dishes, a wave of exhaustion washed over me, and I went and lay down on the floor. The studio floor that had been stenciled with brightly colored autumn leaves, save a circle in the center that marked the place where celebrated artist Gershon Ischkowitz, another Nazi camp survivor, used to paint. 4 visual artists had lived there between Gersh and me, each telling the next to leave the circle in his honor, along with some vodka in the freezer for his spirit. As I lay in Gersh's circle, overcome by that sudden sleepiness, I slipped into a dream. A male voice spoke to me from an opening in the ceiling above. It said, "You are going to feel the Holocaust." Something I can only describe as a drill of white light descended slowly from the ceiling and bored its way into my chest. It hurt. My heart expanded till it nearly burst. I realized I had never actually let that in. Dream number 2. October 21st, 2023. Early morning, barely awake, fumbling for my phone to check the latest news, hovering on the edge of sleep. Again, a dream voice above me speaks, tells me to receive the peace. I feel my forehead tingling, a funnel opening. The peace is poured like liquid light descending golden into the portal in the center of my forehead. My body drinks it. It untangles me. I see the spirits of the newly dead arise. To my left, draped in blue and white, red, black, green, and white. On the right, the spirits begin to whirl, each in their separate worlds, till in the swirl they soon unite and flow their colors like ribbons of light into the funnel in me, softly melting into the peace. Then I wake up and check my phone. Dream number 3. This past Christmas, I went with my Palestinian Jewish daughter to New Orleans to visit our dear David, who has been living there, sitting in the hallowed halls and hovels of jazz, learning at the feet of the African American people, playing piano in a tiny, humble black church every Sunday. Wonders never cease. My first night there, I dream a stream of people walking in somber single file from downstage right to upstage left on my dream screen. They wear tattered clothes made of light. A voice tells me the prisoners are leaving the prison. I feel their plight. They get younger and younger and younger as I witness. Soon they are children, they are babies, waves of grief overcome, wailing sounds from my womb. I awaken to the sound of my own voice weeping. Here's the song, also received in a dream. The lyrics say, "When this sweet life comes to an end, we shall each return to that which we have always been. The light of the stars, the soil of the earth, our mother, womb of the world, Raham, Raham, womb of compassion and mercy." May we grow our capacity and courage to receive the pain and poetry of the other, such that othering may cease. May we surrender all that blinds us and impedes the way to peace. May we weep ourselves awake.
Roula, thank you. Shukran, tada. We have a wall in the lobby that says, "I'm here because ... Well, that got really dramatic there. And people are being invited to post their reasons of why they're here today. I'll just share a few that have been written. I'm here today because I want to help build a shared understanding. Because I'm excited to find commonality and connection with all sides of the issue. I want to teach my children better than I was taught. I want to feel belonging in this challenging time." A few days ago, I was talking with Jeffrey and Raja, and one of them said, "Dave, how did you get 300 people to show up at a book event?" And I said, "I didn't do anything. I just booked the space and told them that you guys were going to be here. Because what you've done, Raja and Jeffrey, is so brave, so courageous, and exactly what we need right now. We all know that it can be very isolating within the Jewish community to express solidarity with Palestinians, and vice versa. You can be accused of being a traitor, you can be accused of legitimizing and normalizing the enemy. But so many of us know in our hearts that the only path forward is the exact opposite. That it's these two people coming together to talk about commonality, shared trauma, and a path forward that involves everyone's needs, and reaching a place where everyone lives in freedom and security in this holy land. So, with that, let me invite the guests of honor, Jeffrey Wilkinson, Raja Khouri.
Thank you for being here today to join us in celebrating our common humanity, a common humanity that has been lost of late. And we are all here to remind ourselves of that humanity. Back to you, sir.
Well, I mean, we're going to talk a little bit about how this sort of, odd couple came together. But I think the essence of what I want to say to start with is that this book came out 4 days before October 7th. There's actually a friend of ours here who thinks that we somehow were engaged in a conspiracy to have the events conspire to support our book. I promise that is not the case. But it is key to hear everything we're saying here in the shifting context of post-October 7th. My community, the Jewish community, has responded to this trauma and wound in a way that even me as a Jew has surprised me. It teaches me to have compassion, to realize that just because my response was different, it doesn't mean that other responses aren't of deep value and important and understandable. When we talk to you today a little bit about the history and a little bit about the bricks in the wall, the things that keep us apart, I really want you to think of it like a tapestry, that all things are woven together, that none of the reactions you see at a protest or online, on Twitter, or Facebook or Reddit or anywhere else, on the news, or someone puts a microphone in someone's face and says, "What do you think about this?" These are all connected. There isn't a trauma that is the moment. I'm angry because somebody said this. I'm hurt because of the way that statement makes me feel. So I'm reacting out of this longitude of pain and trauma. So I just want to start today that everything we say needs to be seen in that sort of long tapestry and not as a single, like, why does someone react to that? Because it's never just that.
Well, since October 7th, we have been living in a world of binaries. You're either with us or with the terrorists. You're either with us or with the genociders. And, nuance has not existed, and any kind of empathy was gone, compassion gone, and interestingly enough, we wrote this book because of that before it happened. 17 years ago, I started a dialogue group with a colleague of mine, Karen Mock, between Jews and Palestinians. And what drove me to start that group was the realization that I did not know anything about the other. Karen Mock and I served on a committee put together by the province at the time to look at hate crimes and victims of hate crimes. She was sitting to my right and Bernie Farber was sitting to my left. And during that process of that committee, I started finding common ground with them. Common ground that I did not know existed. So I began wondering about what else don't I know about these folks. So let us start talking to each other. And many years later, writing this book was about two things for me. One was to benefit others from my community who had not had that experience of dialogue and learning about the other. But more importantly, because I could not tolerate the status quo, where two communities here in Canada, living side by side, did not know anything about the other, only recognize the other as an embodiment of a hateful object, or at the very least, an intolerable and a negative connotation about the other. So, and that was all before October 7. October 7 showed us yet again a new level of that enmity that has been among us and between us. And I'm really happy that the people in this room have chosen the non-binary way as a start. We need to know each other as a first step for us before we can, live in peace with each other.
Beautiful. So very quickly, we'll just continue your story through, Jewish and Arab dialogue, how we got together. The short version is that I did my doctoral research on Jews and Palestinians living here in Toronto, and Raja was one of my victims. He says he continues to be. What I want to be clear about is that the day I walked into Raja's office to interview him for the first time, as a pretty sort of wide-eyed optimist about, listening to these hard stories, I was amazed that he really, almost immediately, if not in the first sort of 30 seconds, because of his other experiences, I would suggest, saw me immediately as someone he trusted, someone he wanted to talk to, someone he was eager to share his stories with. And I was really struck by this openness and honesty, which is why after all the stuff, the academic stuff, and the doctoral thesis was defended, I went back to him and said, we need to do something. Because I was so struck by his genuine, real interest in learning. And my awareness that even though I had studied a lot, I had huge gaps in my learning. So for me, I came to this, as a human rights guy. Pretty clear that I had figured out this privilege thing. Right? And then I discovered that I had a privilege that I never had imagined. My grandparents had published their Holocaust story, and I heard throughout my life the Holocaust story, and in my master's I wrote music to their story. I put their story to music, in English and in German and in Hebrew. And at some point it struck me that nobody asked me if I did it because I was something. And I started to meet Palestinian scholars who didn't seem to have that freedom. And I was really curious about why. I was curious about why my story seemed to be very easily spread, yet this other story wasn't. And it's really, the highlight here today is its curiosity. Raja said, that we thank you for being here and resisting binaries. I'm guessing that some of you are not quite at resisting yet, because this is a journey. All we ask of you is to want to. That's what we ask of you. To be curious enough to say, what if what I was taught has holes in it? What if what I was sure of is not accurate? Yes, thank you. You have our little chart where I have it in my book too. Okay, so we're going to talk about these two overarching stories. Do you want me to start?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so in our book we talk about two what we call meta-narratives. So don't worry about that academic kind of term. It just means overarching. The things that dominate our psyche and our experience with ourselves and with others. For Jews, not surprisingly, it's the Holocaust. And for Palestinians,
it is the Nakba.
So we're going to make sure that everyone has a little bit of sense of what that history is. I'm sure there are people here who are well-grounded in the history. But how did we get to these two events, and how has those events shaped where we are today? So why don't you tell us a little bit about, for example, what led to, the Nakba?
Okay, let's start with centuries of anti-Semitism in Europe. late 1800s, in the late 1800s, the pogroms in Russia and Eastern Europe, start of immigration of Jews, European Jews to Palestine. 1917, the Balfour Declaration Balfour was the Foreign Affairs Minister of Great Britain, the largest, the biggest superpower of the time, that said that His Majesty's government looks favorably upon the establishment of a home for the Jews in Palestine. This declaration, even though Britain did not even have control over Palestine at the time, which was still in the Ottoman Empire, but they saw fit to give away land that wasn't theirs to the Jewish people of Europe. Then there was the Arab Revolt of 1936 to 39 that was trying to achieve two things. Get independence from the mandate of Great Britain over Palestine, but also to limit the number of Jews coming from Europe to Palestine. And then there was the Holocaust.
And there was the Holocaust. So, we always sort of joke with this not so brief history. But I want to make sure, because you all came out here today, what is the nugget? What is the key part? So, I think it's safe to say that everyone in the room has heard of anti-Semitism. The irrational hatred of Jews because they are Jewish. This had been going on for about 2,000 years. But in the late 19th century, 1880 and 1890, there actually was a shift in the thinking around anti-Semitism. It had moved from a faith-based prejudice to a race-based prejudice. And this is what led to the Shoah, we say in Hebrew, or the Holocaust. It is impossible to sit here today, particularly after October 7th, and underestimate the ripple effects of the trauma of the Holocaust, what led to it, the actual event itself, and the responses to October 7th that ignited a lot of this trauma. I think we all know that the Holocaust, roughly 6 million Jews were murdered. It is an impossible experience to live as a Jew and not have some reverence, depth of feeling and understanding about it. Our challenge as we sit here today is that our brain likes simple stories. So simple stories and binaries, I sometimes say, is like chocolate and French fries for the brain. Tastes great, but it has really no nutritional value and it doesn't last. It's a momentary sugar high. And Raj hates what I said because he likes chocolate so much.
Yeah, these are fighting words.
So, we know that the founding of Israel is a complex story in itself that could take us hours to tell. The shortest, simplest story is from the Balfour Declaration to the Holocaust, there had been a steady wave of immigration after immigration of Jewish people to the land. The Arab Palestinians who were there naturally resisted this wave. Led to, immediately after World War II, when the British wanted absolutely nothing more to do with Palestine, the UN declared a partition plan. There wasn't an Israel, but the Jews agreed to the partition plan. The Palestinian Arabs did not. There was a war that was fought in two phases. First, a civil war, a guerrilla-style civil war, and then the Arab countries, in the area, joined the conflict. This created for Jews the State of Israel and the Day of Independence, and for Palestinians, the Nakba, the dispossession of at least 750,000 Palestinians. Our book and our work and you here today We want you to see these meta-narratives as connected and important, not on a political level, but on an emotional level. Not to compare the two, but to clearly say that the resonant effect on both people lives here today in this auditorium, in the streets of Toronto, in Canada, and the world. And we truthfully have, at least for our long history, have known a lot more about one story than the other.
Yeah, I mean, you cannot explain the very strong emotional reaction among Jews to October 7 without realizing that it evoked memories of the Holocaust, of Jews being killed, slaughtered in large numbers. And of course, when Palestinians saw the Palestinians in Gaza being bombed out of their homes and carrying their stuff and going from the north to the south, that could only evoke images of the Nakba to Palestinians, because that's exactly what happened in 1948. They were bombed out of their homes and they carried their belongings and left to a different country. So, I call this guy Dr. Trauma because, I learned from him so much about trauma and how it works. So I'll leave that part to him. But, I now understand, Jewish reaction to events, to words, very differently from 5 years ago when I didn't know this man and we hadn't spoken about trauma and how it works, and emotions and how it works. And our reactions since October 7 on both communities have been nothing but emotional. And you know what we do in this age of social media? We go looking for places for confirming information that confirms to us how bad the other is. And then what do? We take it and we share it with other people in our bubble, in our circle, and so goes on this cycle of hatred, increased hatred, to the point where the other has no humanity whatsoever.
Thank you, Rosa. So I'm going to make it personal. I just want you to think for a minute. So we know about trauma that is not a past event, but the recurrence of the past and the present. We think it happened, but it's actually the story of the happening that lives in us. So each of you, I just want you to take a second and think for a second about something that triggered you in the last 4 months. Could be a news headline, could be something on social media, it could be a picture that you saw. I want you to think about it for a minute. Is everyone doing it? I hope. I can't see you, so I'm trusting you here. I can pretty much promise you that your first reaction to that was almost entirely emotional, because it linked to a previous feeling or experience that you've had. So if you, for example, were really shattered, as many of us were, by October 7th, and you saw a picture of Palestinians and supporters walking down Yonge Street saying "Free Palestine," your emotional reaction was very likely, they want to get rid of me. And we have this beautiful gift that we don't use enough called the prefrontal cortex. It likely was having a nap. If we allow ourselves for a moment to step back, and we're just going to examine that phrase for a minute. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. If we took those last 4 words, Palestine will be free, and added a word in the middle, Palestine will not be free, and we just looked at it that way, we've got 2 alternatives. We have an alternative where one people have rights and the other don't, or we have an alternative where both have equal rights. And if we allow ourselves the space to do that, we could see that protester claiming rights and dignity for all. And we can take this amygdala, an emotional traumatic response, retreat it for a little while on the back bookshelf where it could collect a little dust for a few minutes, and say, I can align with that because I want freedom. So if I want freedom, why wouldn't everyone want freedom? Now, we of course know that there are a small subset of people who need something much more violent about from the river to the sea. But it's, in our experience, a very, very, very small subset. And the people that we talk to who go to protests, Dave was telling us about one he had been to. This is not what they're talking about. They're not talking about the murder of Jews. And this is why the Holocaust is very hard to talk about in this context, because the Palestinians in my research and other places, Raj, that I've talked to, have said the Holocaust is horrible. But I had nothing to do with it. So how do we deal with that complexity? That it lives in Jewish spaces and Jewish trauma. It lives in our Western consciousness, not just Jews. But Palestinians had nothing to do with it. Can you take over for a little while?
So, our book is really about understanding the other, but also about understanding oneself. You know, how do we, why and how we react the way we do. So there are 3 parts in the book that talk about 3 major issues where the outlook from each side is very different, you know, from the other. The first one is anti-Semitism. Of course, to a Jew, anti-Semitism is very clear what it is. But to Palestinians, it's a tool to silence Palestinians. And we will read now a paragraph from the book that talks about exactly that. A weapon to silence, defend and deflect from, or otherwise discredit critics of Israel's actions. It is a club to clubber the heads of those taking a stand for Palestine and the shackle that ties down the hands of solidarity. It is the boot that presses down one's neck, choking speech, silencing thought, removing voice, and eliminating hope. It's an occupation of the narrative.
Anti-Semitism is the powerful force that, in effect, ends up oppressing both Jews and Palestinians.
You know, since October 7, we've heard a lot about if you're asking for a ceasefire, you're anti-Semitic. So there you go.
Well, that was profound. So we're going to read another one on Zionism and the Nakba, but just before we do, just, you know, as we were reading, I was reflecting on the media and things that have happened since October 7th. The narrow definitions of what is and isn't anti-Semitism, or separating anti-Semitism from anti-Zionism. It's hard to do. You remember chocolate and French fries, right? It's easier to take a simple road and a simple story. So I'm really struck by the idea that for me as a Jew, it was frequently suggested that I was anti-Semitic because I called for a ceasefire. And I really I'm trying still to understand, you know, and yes, if you don't get rid of Hamas, then Jews are in danger, and therefore you're putting Jews in danger, and therefore that's anti-Semitism. Maybe I'm simplistic, but I saw the call for a ceasefire as the ending of suffering, of death. And that's all I saw it as.
Before I entered into dialogue, I only knew Zionism in a one-dimensional sense. It's a bad word. It's a swear word for Palestinians. Zionism is pure evil because it took everything from us. And then for the first time in my life, I heard that to a Jew, Zionism is a movement for self-determination. Wow, I had never heard that before. Imagine what else I didn't know. And my Jewish colleague in dialogue, what did they learn from me? That everything Zionism gave Jews, it took away from Palestinians. So we will read now about Zionism and the Nakba from both sides.
For a Jew, Zionism and historic Jewish suffering are intrinsically linked and go to the heart of the Jewish experience and identity. What the land of historic Palestine is, known biblically as the land of Israel or Eretz Israel, has cultural, religious, and spiritual meaning for most Jews. Zionism is life to one and death to another. To one group, the events of 1948 symbolize redemption and are the answer to thousands of years of dislocation, of oppression, and murder. But for the other, these same events represent the loss of everything. Total dispossession, their greatest personal and existential tragedy.
It is hard to overestimate what the Nakba has meant to Palestinians. It was much more than losing their home, land, and homeland. It was being told they could never go back. It was living as eternal refugees in countries that did not always accept them and often were hostile towards them. It was a loss of identity as they attempted to assimilate into identities not their own. It was the bitterness of defeat that would be repeated upon them over and over again. It was the loss of livelihood and enduring life in camps and squalor, in poverty and destitute, shamed and looked down upon, and where in instances they would be bombed and massacred.
Raj, isn't it very different reading that last line after October 7th? It's quite stunning to me emotionally. So something that is very much in our consciousness today is the idea of resistance, or particularly Palestinian resistance, and how this appears very differently to the two groups. So we'll finish our readings today with a short reading from the chapter on Palestinian resistance. And actually, Raja is going to start us off.
To Jews, Palestinian resistance means terrorism and the destruction of Israel. It means Islamist fanatics willing to blow themselves up to kill Jews and destroy Israel. It means Hamas hurling rockets at Sderot, this was written before October 7th, at Sderot to kill innocent Jews and destroy Israel. It means boycotts that aim to discredit Israel in order to destroy it. It means accusations of apartheid aimed at smearing Israel also in order to destroy it. It means Islamic countries ganging up to demonize Israel in international forums in order to destroy it.
To Palestinians, resistance is a philosophical and existential condition. As long as they resist, their will cannot be broken. As long as they resist, they will continue to exist. As long as they resist, they remain the bane of the Zionist project. They resist by any means, over there in Israel-Palestine, through defiance, martyrdom, jihad. Here in North America, in the North American diaspora, through advocacy, boycotts, art, film, music, theater, and poetry.
So, take the boycott. The boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. To a Palestinian, this is a non-violent way of resisting the occupation. Jews were told that it is anti-Semitic. Now, what happens when a Palestinian resisting non-violently is told he's a Jew hater? It hurts both Jews and Palestinians, because to Palestinian, they're resisting Israel. They do not hate Jews. They want to resist through boycotts. To a Jew, imagine a Jewish kid going to college, seeing a table that says BDS information, being told that this is anti-Semitic. That means that table over there is a threat to me, and I feel unsafe. Does it have to be that way? As Jeff often says, why can't that kid, instead of feeling threatened, walk up to that table, ask them, what is this about? Tell me about it.
Thank you. So I'm thinking so many things. We're going to get to questions really soon. Dave, is there quite a number of questions, just so we have a sense of time? Okay. So I think, I'm guessing that a lot of you came here for hope. That's why I get up in the morning. So what gives us hope? It's been a tough time in the last few months. And we'll be honest with you, we're in the thick of it. We are talking to Jews and to Palestinians who are experiencing real tension. I've been talking to many Jews who feel threatened by protests, who feel threatened by the rise in the left's fierceness in supporting Palestine. And there has been a shift. And I have empathy for fellow Jews who felt, pretty in control of the narrative. And now there's a pretty big force pushing back against that narrative. Also, we have talked personally to Palestinians and supporters who have lost their jobs, who are being threatened on campus with losing placements, with losing opportunities for hire, are being doxxed. We're in a bad place. So what do we do? What do all you wonderful people thinking purple, wearing purple, thinking of coming together, what do we do? And so we want to kind of dedicate the rest of our time to really doing that. So the first thing I would always say is complicate your news sources. Diversify where you get information. The best information you're going to ever get is to talk to somebody who has a different view than yours. 2, realize the power of emotion. That your first response is almost always an emotional one and unlikely to be a truth-teller. 3, listen to understand, not to respond. Don't ask a question like many of us do. Well, what do you think about? When you're really saying, clearly you're wrong about what you think. How do you lean in the middle of this pain that you're experiencing to something that's unknown to you? Also, just want to be really, really clear that we are not pie in the sky kumbaya people. I walked the last 2 days thinking about coming to you today, and I shared this with Raja. I was feeling I was feeling raw. I know the message of compassion is the right one. I know the message of reaching across is the right one. Yet I'm living with the colleagues and friends who are experiencing 30, 40, 50 family members killed in Gaza. My human heart is destroyed. Or my Jewish heart, well, partly my Jewish heart, but my Jewish heart and my human heart are kind of the same thing. I do this work not in spite of my Judaism, but because of it. I see in Raja not a Palestinian, but a brother. A shared walker in trauma and pain and hopes for freedom.
I learned so much about the goodness in Judaism from this man. And you know, what gives me hope is that the best defenders of Palestinian rights have been Jews. What gives me hope is when young Jewish men and women went and occupied the capital in DC asking for a ceasefire. You know, we came together so quickly and so closely because of simple things. We share similar values. The fact that I'm Palestinian and he's Jewish are irrelevant, have become completely irrelevant. Sometimes I tell him I forget he's a Jew.
I never forget some American.
I tell him I can forgive him for one and not the other. I also tell him that he should change his last name to Wilkinson. So, you know, people ask us, you know, how did October 7 affect your relationship? And the first time I was asked that question, and we get it quite often, I was surprised. It had never occurred to me that it would affect our relationship. The main value that we hold that keeps this glue, keeps between us so strong, is integrity and honesty. When Palestinians screw up, I tell them Palestinians are screwed up. And he does the same. It's
For Jews. Just to clarify.
You know, we both come to the conclusion that it's not about who's right, but it's about what's right. And that's what keeps us going.
So I can leave you with one thought before Dave starts asking us some questions. Because it's often the questions where the richest part occurs in these talks. Misery. I want you to engrave this on your brain. Misery, pain, trauma has no hierarchy. There's no good pain, no good trauma. It's all misery. And it does not have a structure in itself that is empowered or powered. We have allowed ourselves to see certain kinds of pain as related to us, and therefore we respond and care about it. And other pain seems distant and far away. We have lived with the idea that here in the West we are somewhat detached from the suffering of Palestinians because they don't live in our framework in the same way. Now, of course, there's lots of people who don't feel this way, but our body politic has expressed continuously a favoritism for one trauma and a dismissal of another. Don't let them do it.
You know, our race to the bottom. Our race to the bottom towards victimhood, who's the bigger victim, who's even the only victim, drives us to these, competitiveness in our misery. And you know, what Jeff just said about the trauma of the Holocaust and the trauma of the Nakba to the defenseless mind has, we've gotten this reaction quite a few times. Are you comparing the Holocaust to the Nakba? No. We're saying there's a trauma emanating from both of these overarching events. And there is no trauma meter that we know of to tell us whose trauma is bigger. So let's just cut it off, this competitiveness towards victimhood. And to the extent that at times people say, we are the only victim. And the truth is that both sides are victims. And as the late Edward Said, the Palestinian intellectual and author, said, Palestinians are the victims of victims and refugees of refugees. Good question, Claire?
Round of applause for that. All right, stop texting me, everyone. Swiping left, swiping right, like good question, bad question.
You're all good.
That's right. They say there's no bad questions. That's not true. No, really, thank you. I'm getting a lot of really good questions here. We'll do this, I think we can do this for about half an hour. And then, if you want to buy the book, you really should. They're going to be out there, and they're going to be signing them. So, I'm also going to make sure that when we end, people are going to come up to the stage to try and talk to you, and we're going to have bodyguards who actually get you to the book table. Don't talk to anyone until you're selling books.
To be clear, we're not going anywhere. So you can talk to us.
But not at the stage.
You can talk to us for as long as you want after. After the
The fear bred by the violence and threats of religious extremists pushes many moderates away from compassion and political power. How might we overcome this? And I would add to that sadly, I think it's fair to say that extremists, religious extremists, have risen to power on both sides and created a lot of violence. So yeah, how might we overcome this?
I'm really glad you have the mic. Oh.
And I'm not sharing it with you. Go ahead.
Oh, it's your question.
You really
Okay, you take the tough question.
Okay, so I'm going to answer it this way. I think we like this sort of, our brain likes this idea of sides, and that goes along with extremism. So I'm going to offer to you that extremism is an extension of our natural condition. So I want to start by really framing it, because what we do when we say the word extremist is we other. We say, how could those people possibly be like X? Well, all of us could be like X. With the proper indoctrination, trauma, pain, hopelessness, fear, misinformation, disinformation, we can all become extreme in our positions. So I think that's just really important to kind of qualify. The cure for extremism is building the middle. Building coalitions that don't soft-soap tough issues, but find spaces to work together. The soonest we say this word like extremists, so if you think of, well certainly we have a couple of groups. I think the Israeli government, to most of us, are extremists. And Hamas are militant extremists. But how did this form? This didn't form because there's innately evil people in the world and there's good folks like us. We'd love to think that's the case, but it really isn't. So I think the first key is to understand that any difference, human rights violation, inequity that goes unaddressed creates extremism. So at its core, we got to go back to the problem. Our message since October 7th, we hope, has been consistent and clear. October 7th was a tragedy and a horrible event, but the story didn't start there. And you're not going to get a complete answer if you start there.
See why I wanted him to answer the question? The only thing I'd like to add to that is that here, in the diaspora, there are no bonds falling on us. But there are those who, in our book, we call bad actors. And that's bad with two D's. Stands for groups that do nothing but blame, attack, demonize, and dismiss the other. Blame, attack, demonize, and dismiss. Why do they do that? Well, there are a number of reasons. Number one is it's good for business. Keeps them working. But more importantly and more harmfully, they do this to keep the tribe together, and they keep the tribe together by demonizing the other and saying, no, we are different from them. And the other very important reason here is that they do that to control the narrative. And by controlling the narrative, they control us. And they perpetuate their presence.
I'm gonna add to this one. There was a question. Let's say, I'll just read it as it's written. There are many left-wing supporters in Israel. Is there a similar movement among Palestinians? And this is a question that we hear a lot in the Jewish community, this idea that like, oh, we're progressive, we want peace, but is there anyone to work with? Where's the peace movement on the other side?
Well, you know, this reminds me of the many times we heard how Israel has no partner in peace. And all the generous peace offers that were made to the Palestinians, they refused them. Well, I mean, first of all, the word generous and giving someone his own land back, the word generous doesn't, factor into it. And the second reason is that, if they had been really generous and adequate in meeting Palestinian needs, then they wouldn't have been refused. So that's part of the answer. The other part is that, of course, there are progressive Palestinians and Arabs. I don't know why you're not hearing them. They do exist, and they do exist in good numbers, and they are outspoken, and you can find them even in Gaza today under bombardment. It's true that the attack on October 7th killed many peace-loving Israelis, among them Vivian Silver. But in Gaza also it killed peace-loving people, poets, musicians, journalists, young and old. So, this idea that one people are more peace-loving than the other is just rubbish. But one thing needs to also be remembered, that to the average Palestinian, if you're asking them to, condemn Hamas and be peace-loving, first thing they will tell you is, please take your boot off my neck first.
I'm going to combine two comments here that came in. One says, it's hard not to have Israeli voices represented in this conversation. And the second one elaborates a bit. The lived experience of Israelis and Israeli Canadians is different than the experience of North American Jews. I'm curious if you have been engaged with Israelis as part of the ongoing learning from each other. Let me comment first as one of the organizers. We are planning future events, and we have a bunch of Israeli groups that we're planning to bring here to speak, including Standing Together, Omdim B'Yachad, maybe Betzelan, maybe Breaking the Silence, Sochrot, Yad B'Yad, absolutely. these guys are here, they wrote the book, I love the book, so they're here. But the other thing I'll say is, I think as diasporas here, it is an important discussion about what do we think, what are we feeling. The diasporas and our impact on our members of parliament and legislatures and funding for both aid and military support, that comes from us. We have a huge role to play here, both in the US and in Canada, and I think it's a legitimate conversation for Canadian Jews and Canadian Palestinians to be talking to each other from that lens.
Thank you very much for the question. I mean, I think you've already answered part of it, but I think it's very profound, the underline of the question. Just a couple minutes ago, Raja talked about it. You know, we don't have bombs and rockets falling here, but we have verbal bombs and rockets. It's why we're here to do something about it. It's been very interesting. We've had many events when Jews in the audience were Israeli and stood up and asked a question or came to see us afterwards. I was recently at an event where two Jewish Israelis had just come back from being, they were on a kibbutzim at the time of October 7th, and they came back here, they were on a kibbutz, and they had been to many kibbutzim in Israel, Palestine. And what they tried to share with me was that I couldn't possibly understand as a diaspora Jew what they were experiencing. And I said, I never can understand what someone else is experiencing. I can't understand Dave's experience fully. So I start with the assumption that I don't fully understand your experience. And I also really want to honor Dave's point that I don't want us to think here that we are somehow a diminished capacity Jewish response because we're not from Israel. Here, we have a very important role to play. We are the ones who are going to influence Canadian politicians and maybe eventually American politicians. So I don't want to underplay it, and I do want to sympathize and empathize that being a Jew here has a safety layer that being a Jew there does not. And I start with that in my brain, in every conversation I have. I live in a different way than a Jew in Sderot or Tel Aviv lives. I talk with them, they tell me what their experience is, but it's not the same thing. Do you have anything to add?
What, if anything, is something that you have learned since you published the book that you would add to the book now?
You know, yeah, it's, unfortunately our book was prophetic in that we are, as communities, reacting today exactly how we say in the book, we react. If I want to add anything to the book, it will be, we told you so. We said this is how we...
How very productive of you, Roger.
I have never seen such polarization between the communities as there are today. Never seen it. And I think, we've achieved a new achievement here. And there are a number of things that contribute to that. A, the world has been polarizing in a number of areas. B, we have been fed a lot of venom over the years by those who like to demonize the other. And three, we have in Israel the most right-wing government that was openly talking about genocide, removing people from Gaza and so on. And we have the left in North America that has now adopted the Palestinian cause and put it within the context of settler colonial that has been at the heart of the justice movement in North America for a number of years. And when you start looking at an emotional conflict between Jews and Palestinians here, and start putting a theory around it that puts it within the context of good people, bad people, that's going to be polarizing, for both sides.
Excellent. I think the only thing I would add is that, we have had some kind people say we should put out a second edition and add a chapter on October 7th. And I think the thing that I would emphasize a lot more is be able to address what's happening on college and university campuses, which I see as an absolute travesty as an academic. The complete evil of explicit knowledge. Thank you. The inability to hear something that really hurts you, and instead of piling on and filing another lawsuit, going to the person and say, "What the hell are you talking about? Did you know my experience? Do you know how that landed with me when you said, things like so-called entity called, the Zionist entity called Israel? You know how that felt?" I truly believe, I'm a maybe naive optimist, that a 10-minute conversation can shift that permanently. Well, I was talking about settler colonialism. I wasn't talking about Jews. Really? I was sure you were talking about me. No, I wasn't talking about you. So what you're really saying is that you're standing up for people's rights. Yeah? Well, I can get that. I really encourage you next time to use language or to talk to me first so we can write it together. Do something different. This is all very possible. It seems impossible right now. It's not. There's someone actually in the audience I've been thinking about a little bit because she said something to us. She said that and I hope I say it right, she said that our book waged love. And it's been resonating in my head. Go out today and wage love.
And buy the book.
You have time for a few more. Oh, yeah.
Yes, I'm Raja Joe, of course, is buy the book. I'm going to add just one little tiny thing to that. Buy the book for somebody who might resist it. If you have the financial means to do so, and I'm not doing that to promote the book, but the book is sold amazingly. We're through our third printing and moving to our fourth. But I do believe that too much of people who already agree are reading the book. So buy it for someone who will be challenged by it.
How do we see the right of return and its seemingly inherent contradiction of Israel's Jewish demographic preference? And I'll just add to that by saying that from the Jewish perspective, right of return, people assume means that people come back and say, "I want my house back," when often it just means we want to go back to the land we lived in. What does the right of return mean to you? And what are the different ways it's used? And is it a viable idea?
Now, one thing that I found in my experience in talking to Jews is that most Jews do not recognize that most Palestinians are still stuck in 1948. And the reason for that is that it has never been acknowledged. And in Israel, you're not even supposed to talk about it. It's definitely not in the history books that children use in school. And the fact that any Jew from anywhere in the world can go to Israel, become a citizen immediately, when people who are actually from there could not go back there. It's not something that's easy to accept. So when Palestinians talk about the right of return, they're essentially saying, recognize what happened in 1948 to us. And it's not like 1948 happened and ended. To Palestinians, it continues till today. The theft of land continues. As we know, settlements continue to grow. People are being kicked out of their homes in Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem. So the right of return is about recognize our trauma, recognize our history. And then, we need to consider now, after 75 years of trying to divide historic Palestine between two peoples, we have failed. Now there are those who are calling for one state, a democratic state for all. Of course, there are those who say that's impossible. Israel will never do that. Jews, need to be in a majority to feel safe. But we have to also recognize that as it happens in this moment today, historic Palestine has equal number of Jews and Palestinians. And, the two-state option for the last 75 years hasn't worked. Peter Barnard, to those who know him, is a very progressive Jew, intellectual, who continues to identify himself as a Zionist, but he has adapted his idea of Zionism to the reality that there are 7 million Jews and 7 million Palestinians of this land who haven't been able to live in peace separately, that a Jewish home in Palestine is good enough for him in terms of his Zionist beliefs. Maybe not this generation, maybe the next, but I remain hopeful that one day we will figure out a way to share this land with equal rights and equal opportunities for both peoples, and that's it.
Are people okay if we do another 10 or 15 minutes of questions? Hands up. I don't know when this game actually starts or how many care. One more question?
You have time to sign the book.
Okay, that's
and nobody here wants to go to the Super Bowl, right?
Let's do a few quick lightning round questions.
Okay, lightning round.
We'll do like the hardest ones, but lightning round. Okay.
Bring it on.
Iran. So, Iran. So what I mean by that is from the Jewish perspective, like both sides see themselves as the David against the Goliath, which is unfathomable to the Palestinian community. It's like, are you kidding me? You have an army. But from my family's perspective, we're not against Hamas. We're against all the Arab countries. We're against Iran, and it's all about Iran trying to kill all the Jews. So what role does Iran play in this little slice of land? That's a lightning round.
That's lightning round. Okay, so lightning answer. Iran is a bad actor. And they do not have the power that is often portrayed in the West. It's a super short, simplistic answer. But in the region, the role of Iran is not a constructive one. That's what I mean by a bad actor. They are not a constructive force to creating unity, solidarity, and a way forward. And we focus on Iran because it's easier than dealing with 1948, 1967, and the daily tragedies and abuses of being a Palestinian in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. That's my statement about Iran.
Iran has, since the Islamic Revolution, has been trying to grow its influence in the region. So does Turkey, so does Saudi Arabia, and so does Israel. Everybody's trying to increase their influence in the region. There will be, at some point, regime change in Iran, and that, they will still be working to grow their influence in the region, but probably in different means, not through Islamist militias and the like. To the Iranian regime, Israel is the boogeyman that helps keep unity locally, domestically. I think that it's 90% of what Iran does with respect to Israel, the United States, is meat for the base. It's red meat for the base. Maintain unity among the ranks. Yes, they are a regional threat, but they're one of many. But Iran is also a boogeyman for us in the West. They're the bad guys. Notice how we always say Iran backed this, Iran backed that, to indicate who's the good guy and who's, the bad guy. Next.
One more?
Sorry, I'm just going to give you a few more. You want to see the football game, is that what's happening?
No, I don't want people to leave before we get a chance to
I know. I don't see a lot of... 2 more questions, is that okay?
Yeah.
This is good stuff. This is a tough one for you. Maybe it's not a tough one. Why are children in Gaza taught from a young age that killing Jews is the right thing to do? And by the way, I hear this every week from members of my family and friends.
Maybe it's not right for the Palestinians to answer. Maybe the Jews should answer.
I don't know.
What do you
Either of you
think?
can answer.
Go ahead, take a step.
Okay.
We do address it in the book. I'll say that first. Just feel the emotional impact of that statement. Why are Palestinian children taught to hate Jews? If I said to you, why are Israeli children taught to hate Palestinians, how would you feel? I'm not saying there are, I didn't say it to say that. I'm saying feel the emotional impact. Just feel it, just be with it for a moment. There is repeated academic studies that look deeply at how both groups of students are taught, and neither of it is completely healthy or proper. But it is part, I'm going to say here, of our Western demonization of the other, to blame UNRWA or Palestinians for a level of hatred that is beyond our capacity to hate. Because it just isn't true. It feels good, but in my academic, learned research experience, it is a problem, but it is a problem that is pushed by a particular side to promote a political agenda, and that we need to teach all of our children to have compassion and empathy and love for the other.
Life in Gaza teaches children to hate Israel.
Isn't that a powerful answer? Yeah. Doesn't that shift your brain?
Look, when you don't see a future for yourself, no future. If you're a young woman who wants to go and study abroad, she files her application, gets accepted. Based on that acceptance, she has to ask for a permit. She may or may not get that permit. She might get it 2 or 3 years later when the acceptance has long expired. That's how much the lives of the people of Gaza are in the hands of Israel.
And if I can add, who is Hamas? I mean, we're not supporting, we think Hamas is terrible. We say it over and over again that what they did on October 7th is a war crime, and their foundational way of thinking is antithetical to coming together. But who is Hamas? Hamas are primarily young men who've grown up with 16 years inside a blockade. The only solution to radicalism is human rights. This is the only solution.
And I'd like to comment on the word Jews in that question. there's the difference between Jews and Israelis. We like everybody to recognize that, right? But Jews have to recognize that too. You know, the Hamas attack on October 7th was not on Jews, it was on Israelis. Yes, they killed civilians, I get all of that. But I was intrigued by the fact that many people were talking about it as if it's an attack on Jews. It was an attack on Israel. It's very different from wanting to kill Jews because you hate Jews. And yes, expressions of solidarity with Palestine sometimes go overboard and into anti-Semitism, and that's wrong, and that's bad. But we have to understand that the source is not hatred of Jews, the source is the oppression of Palestinians.
Is Muhannad Hashim here, by the way? Great. Yeah, come close. One last question for you. How do we talk to the people who aren't in this room today and make them part of the conversation, other than buying your book?
You want to start?
Yeah, it's a tough question, you start.
Well, I'm actually going to reframe the question. What you asked was, how do you talk to people? You don't. You listen to them. I know that sounds very platitude, pie in the sky, but it really is. I spent 2.5 hours at dinner a friend's apartment, and the woman is Jewish and very tied to Israel. And in a 2-hour conversation, I probably talked for 4 minutes. Never ever had someone just listen to her experience, to the fact that her father was a Holocaust survivor from Romania, to the fact that she lived on a kibbutz and had to stand guard in 1966 to people from Jordan that they saw as a threat. To just listen to why, for her, the Israeli pro-Israel narrative was not a story, but her identity and her belonging. I didn't change her mind. But she walked out knowing that someone who sees the world differently cared about her perspective. That conversation, that non-conversation, that listening, hundreds of times over, is what's going to change the tide that we're in right now.
You know, I mean, binary thinking is easy. Good, bad. And hate is easy. I hate you. You're not angry. Finish, end of story. The harder, the more difficult road, the road that's less taken, is looking for nuance, is looking for understanding. That's why we wrote the handbook. It's about understanding. And you know, if you're not interested in that, there's no room to go forward. You have to start by wanting to, right? I mean, the title of the book is What Jews and Palestinians Don't Want to Know About Each Other. We have to start with wanting to. And if the people outside the room that you're talking to, you're listening to, want to, it's not hard. If we can do it, anyone can do it.
Or as we say, want to want to.
We have to thank the dazzling Dave really
There were a lot of questions we didn't get to. I apologize for that. Many of them would be very expected from the Jewish community. There were questions about the Hamas charter, Jews who were displaced after 48, and doesn't that all balance out? From the other side, you know, why would we compare two traumas when one was half a century ago and one is happening today? These are great questions. There's no clear answers. That's why we're starting a conversation. We have a long way to go. I'm so glad that you both wrote this book, that you took the time to share your afternoon with us. All of you are here. I did want to invite Muhannad up quickly. He's with the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. And events like this cost money for the police officers, for the space, and the foundation supported us, and I want to thank you for that and give you the chance to say a few words.
So I didn't prepare for this, and it's going to be a bit. This has been an emotional conversation for me. I've been craving this conversation since the beginning, not just October 7th, but for many years. Because, you know, I've seen year after year this conversation getting more polarized, more difficult. The Canadian Race Relations Foundation is a federal crown corporation, so we're part of the federal government. I am undoubtedly going to get attacked for funding this, so please, if you can hear you. I said I'm undoubtedly going to get attacked for funding this, so if you do see a notification that come support us, please do so. But it is getting horrible here. Like, I don't know how neighbors are going to look at each other. I don't know how friends are going to remain. I was looking for Bernie, because I know Bernie typically would ride with his crew, but he's not here. And I've had many conversations with Bernie because this is Bernie Farmer I'm referring to, because he's a close friend. He's like an off the comment. I bother him all the time. But he's in a deep place. He's in a hurt place. And I think that what's happening now is that first to start with who's condemning Hamas, and then who's calling for a ceasefire, and then who's suing who's silencing who. And what I'm seeing is that no one is choosing hope. And today, this conversation reminded me that hope is the only way forward. So I just want to thank you for
Please give a round of applause to Dave Meslin as well for everybody.
Quickly, again, New Israel Fund Canada, thank you so much. Winchevsky Center, UJPO, Roula Said, amazing. These guys, all of you, washrooms are through this door, book sales are through that door. Thank you so much for coming. Hands up if you would come to another event like this and bring 2 friends.